action is better than spending a ton of time just solving one thing. I'm sure you've heard it said, but if you look at the people around you that are closest to you, that is the biggest determinant to your long-term success. So make sure to be networking and connecting with people at levels beyond you.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do us one teeny tiny little favor. Make sure to give us a follow because you're not going to want to miss any of the amazing guests that I have for you this year. So without further ado, let's get right into this one. Mike, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to meet you yet, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, at a high level, we design, build, and rent apartments, but we're really about solving housing affordability. Right now, we're achieving about a 20 to 30% reduction in cost, and we believe someday we'll achieve a 50% reduction in cost. Those of you maybe unaware, the cost of housing in our world has gone up substantially. In fact, it's grown faster than incomes. And so someday we believe we can reduce your rent by half or your mortgage payment by half.
That's amazing, Mike. And Mike, take us back to little Mike. Take us back to when Mike was a little child growing up. What were some of your biggest aspirations, your dreams? What was money like in your household? Take us back to that time period of, was this always in store? Like, hey, I want to put on my cape and solve the housing crisis? Or did this just come along somewhere along the journey?
I always knew I wanted to make some kind of meaningful impact in some way. And so when I was young, it was special effects, right? So I got all my high school friends and junior high friends together. And we created sets and movies and just try to do something cool and clever. Looking back, it was all a bit childish, but it was still exciting and life-changing in some ways. And so, I went off to college, studied computer science and mathematics and management. But, my heart of hearts, for me at least, I knew I always wanted to make some kind of major impact, some significant positive impact on the world. And so that has always driven me throughout my career and has helped guide me here and later in life as well.
Let me ask you a question, right? Because you mentioned in college, you kind of knew, and growing up, you already knew that. That bug is something that not a lot of people get touched by, right? That bug of wanting to make massive impact, wanting to make a change, wanting to make a difference, not just in your house, but on a global level. Describe that feeling for us. Like, how did you know that you were almost meant for more? You were called for more. What was that feeling like? And now, growing up, as I said, a lot of people don't have that. So did there ever come a point in time where you felt like you didn't fit in, or you felt like you were misunderstood, or you just felt like you just were amongst people that were still kind of asleep at some point in your life? Or like, what was it like navigating, knowing that you had this in you? And most people never quite get that.
Yeah, there's a part of it that's a little bit isolating, right? Because if you're so driven to change the world and the people around you are just like comfortable with their day-to-day lives and they look at you and think you're strange, right? Like, great, we're at Easter, let's just hang out. And I'm thinking, no, I ate dinner already, let's go do the next thing. But my dad died at a relatively young age, and it really reminded me of how short life really is. When you're young, all you think about is how life is going to go on forever, right? Like, you've got an eternity left over. I'm telling you, it goes really fast. And so the question, we only have about 5,000 weeks to live here on Earth. And so the question I often ask myself is, how do I want to spend the minutes I have here on Earth? And if all you're thinking about is tomorrow, you're going to get to some point in your life, you're going to look back and say, I wasted my life. I think it's important, especially at a young age, to spend some time thinking about, what do you want your life to amount to, right? And maybe that is living a comfortable life and engaging a lot with your family and friends, and that's where you want to be. That's great. But if you understand that, it helps guide your decision-making along the way. But if you want to make some bigger impact, especially if you want to get to that kind of level, you need to have that vision in place so you can stake the steps day in and day out so that you're spending the minutes you have on life wisely.
Man, I love that. And you mentioned that your father died early, and my condolences, brother. I was looking a lot into the hero's journey, and one of the parts in the hero's journey is atonement of the father. And it's saying that the hero can't fully, dive into his hero-ness, into his true power, into his true form until the atonement of his father. And the metaphorical sense is pretty much when your father dies, but your father resembling one of the people that has the most power and influence over your life, and the person that you usually look up to. And one of the guys that I learned a lot from, his name is Jordan Peterson, and he talks about it. It's like you can't fully become an adult until your parents die. Not literally, but like metaphorically speaking, because you get to, growing up, and your parents may be whoever your caretakers were. Growing up, you always, go to them to, whenever you need help, whenever you need something, whenever you don't know something. And then you get to a certain point in time when you know just as much, if not more, than they do. And if you're still running back to your parents after everything, you'll forever stay a child. But until you realize that, hey, sometimes your parents or caretakers can't take care of you, or can't help you, not because they don't want to, but because they actually know less than you do, or just the same amount as you do. And then from that point on, you have to then evolve. And for me, I've been very blessed and fortunate to have not had to go through a loss in my life quite yet. And people like Jordan Peterson have helped me kind of come to understanding those things without having to lose somebody. So I've been very blessed and fortunate. But for you, so you mentioned that your father died. And before we segue into the main part of today's conversation, so navigating the world, what was like your compass? Like what did you have to look up to? Because that could affect the kid early on. Like for me, I grew up, my grandparents raised me. My parents, they're still around, but they weren't around physically as a child. So it's like, what was it like for you growing up?
I was blessed with really good parents, and they helped guide and shape me. And they're flawed individuals as well, but really great, great parents. And one of the things upon my dad's passing, it was really hard. It was really a rough moment in my life. But just to your point, I look back and there was sort of a blessing in disguise there, because I was at a point that I was running this business, which, by the way, my parents originally started. It was a small business at the time, but it took over. And I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think there is a lot of power in that, because you can start questioning things, right? You're not tied down to the way things were supposed to be done. There's nobody there to tell you no. Now, there's tremendous pain in that journey, but there is tremendous innovation as well, because you can explore and discover and find new ways to do things. And you can help push humanity forward in your own little niche, your own little way. And so one of the things I often tell people is when you start something new, you're terrible at it. I think a lot of us, especially as you get older, tend to be fearful of trying something new, because at that stage in your life, you just want to have the things that go out there just be good right out of the gate. But as a younger person, you're actually blessed a little bit in that you have a little less of that fear. So step out, try something new. It's going to be terrible at first. That's okay. That's part of the normal human behavior. But if you keep with it and keep pushing forward, eventually you break through and make some meaningful impact.
Man, that's amazing, brother. And now let's segue a little bit into the conversation. So you were talking about making an impact on the world, changing people's lives.
Yeah.
Did you always know that real estate was going to be your vehicle for making that impact? Like, when did real estate come into the picture? You mentioned your parents, that your business that your parents were running, that you then started to run. Was that a real estate business? Like, tell us a little bit about how real estate came into the picture.
Yeah, it was not at all real estate. In fact, I remember growing up telling my parents that real estate was a boring industry because everything is understood, right? I went off to school for computer science. I was very involved in virtual reality a decade before it came out. And I thought startup and tech and that world was the most exciting and the greatest opportunities. And there's a part of that environment. I came of age or graduated college in 2009. Great time to look for a career, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of the world beats you down a bit. And sometimes necessity is the mother of some of the best innovation and invention. And so, originally graduating college, my parents really wanted me to join the business. And I was testing the water in different areas. And part of me really didn't want to join. And the reason is I didn't want people to think this was given to me, right? There's so much of your own ego is wrapped up into your life. And especially me at that age, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove to the world that I had what it took. And what I realized, it was sort of a year of processing through that. What I realized is you should take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you, right? Get past your own ego. Recognize what you want to accomplish and use every lever at your fingertips to engage and move that forward in the most positive, strong way that you can.
Yeah, I feel, hey man, you've been dropping some amazing stuff so far. So proving the world, you have to prove it to yourself. I don't know what it is, man, but I had that same thing as well too. And I came to this realization, and I don't know who made this idea, so I'll just say that I coined this idea. But everyone always talks about how people that are silver spoon fed, right? You had a silver spoon and trust fund babies, and it's not really worth it because they didn't have to work for anything. And I realized that the spoon, the utensil that a man eats with doesn't determine his appetite. So you can give a man a wooden spoon, a silver spoon, a gold spoon, doesn't matter what they're eating with. If their appetite isn't there, they'll never amount to much in life. And so for me, I realized that people spend too much complaining about what we're eating with and not enough time focusing on how much we're eating. And the people who are focusing on how much they're eating are going to eat a whole lot more and continue eating because they're not worried about everyone's utensils. They're worried about the food on their table and the food on their plate. And a lot of times, people who have less sometimes make people who have more to start off feel guilty due to them having a little bit of benefits or other benefits that they might have not had. But no matter what it is or where you start off, everything is a blessing because you may not start off with much. But let's say you grew up in the streets, right? Now you have street smarts where most people don't ever have street smarts. And anyone who's book smart will never go logically and go get street smarts. So if you can have street smarts coming into this world of business, this world of, academia, you'll be so much more ahead because you have this other edge to you. Or for example, let's say you didn't have much, you'll be able to have that much more of a come up story. Like the reason why people love Rocky so much is because there's a come up story. So it's like, yeah, you didn't have a lot to grow up with, a lot to start off with, but that story, those lessons that you learn, not having much to start off with, is going to make it so much more impactful when you do finally figure it out and get it going. But you never will figure it out if you're spending time watching everyone else's plates or cards or spoons or whatever you want to call it, right? So,
and I love that analogy. You're so right that it really takes the right person with tenacity. I have seen it many times over that someone is given a lot in life to start off and destroy it. The common phrase is the first generation builds it, the second generation maintains it, and the third generation destroys it. And so regardless of where you start in life, if you've got the right spirit and energy, you can grow that into something.
Man, I love that. And that's the first time I heard that. I heard the quote that the average inheritance lasts only 3 generations, but I never actually heard the quote that way. So let me ask you, right? So now you decided to finally stop putting your ego in front of you and you got into your parents' business. What were some of the lessons you learned there? And how did that then, where was the segue? Where is the bridge into the housing? Where did that come into play?
Yeah. So, one of the big lessons early on is feeling inadequate and getting past that. When my dad passed away, I was working on a project, building a new apartment building. And this city shut me down twice. And the second time, the city officials came to me and said, "You're just a pipsqueak kid. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not very good at what you do." And they were a bit right. And they forced me to hire a manager. And we did, and we hired him in 3 days because if we didn't, we'd be shut down completely and I had to lay our team off, 10 or so people. And that's the worst way to hire. We can talk a lot about hiring and how that changes your life completely. But then I worked behind the scenes, kind of doing all the work for this manager and getting everything polished up. And I remember toward the end of this project, we had a water main. So this is the water pipe that feeds the building. It's quite large, like 8 to 12 inches wide. It produces a lot of water. And it's thousands of feet long, buried 15 feet in the ground. And we were now passing the water test, meaning that there was some pinhole leak, just drips somewhere in that pipe. And I was in my nicer clothes, nicer outfit. I was out there in the mud for weeks as we're redigging up this pipe, looking for this tiny little leak. Eventually we found it. And just a few weeks before we were supposed to open, the city staff came out and said, "No, Mike, there's no way. You're not opening this building. You're not doing a good enough job. And we don't see it." And I remember the very last day, We had a half a dozen building inspectors, including the head building official, spend a half a day digging into every nook and cranny of this building. And I remember being in the parking garage and the head building official pulled me aside and said, Mike, I know we were hard on you, but looking at it today, this is the best project we've ever opened in this city. Right? I literally spent years feeling inadequate, feeling like I wasn't good enough. And there's some truth to that I wasn't. But I kept with it. I kept pushing forward through that. And eventually I broke through to gain that confidence. And so if that's at all you at a younger age, feeling that inadequacy, we're all at that level. And so push forward and keep pushing forward, and it's going to come out good in the end.
Yeah, man. One of the guys I've been watching a lot recently, Alice Ramos, he talks about like when you start, you suck. And then keep going, like you'll suck less. And then eventually you won't suck that much. And eventually you actually be good at what you do. Right. But it's like so many people have this thing where it's like, I have this ego, whatever it may be. It's like, man, I know what I'm talking about, whatever it may be. But it's like, man, until you earn your stripes, until you get in the battlefield and you start, you go to war, you start your business, whatever it may be. It's like all the empirical knowledge is great. All the YouTube university videos is great. The courses, the workshops, et cetera, but it's like, so you actually get out there and get in the mud and start looking for leaks in the 1,000-foot pipes and stuff like that. Until you get out there, man, it's going to take a while for you to really start getting good at your craft. So let me ask you, during this whole time, you have this feeling of inadequacy. How did you push through? Because a lot of times that could swallow us whole because our ego wants to say that we're good or that we're doing something good. And it's hard for a lot of people to admit that, hey, I'm actually not good at this at all whatsoever. And despite that, I'm going to keep on going. So what did you use? Was it a quote? Was it, a mantra that you lived by? What was it that pushed you through this time while you were still learning the ropes?
Yeah. I'll give you one quick anecdote first, which is I was talking to a prominent YouTuber and I was asking what made you one of the best YouTubers out there on a big platform, what have you. And he said to me something I won't soon forget. The difference between me and most people is I hit record, right? It's just taking that first step is such a key part of it. But for me, what I've really learned at a deep level is to forget and just let it go about how you look toward other people, right? If you're worried that your first set of stuff is going to look bad and people are going to be negative toward you and beat you down, I mean, that is going to happen, but you have to almost set that aside and say, okay, this is just part of the process. Everyone goes through stage 1 to get to stage 2 to get to stage 3. This is my battle scars. This is me earning my stripes on my uniform. And if you start having that perspective that this is going to happen and this is how you get to the end goal, it helps you reframe it from I'm not good enough to I am where I should be today and I'm going to become good enough.
No, that is amazing. I love that. Forget how you look in the eyes of others when starting off. And it reminds me of something that I learned. And it was pretty much saying in a video that the reason why you're worried, why you're nervous, why you're scared, why you have all this fear and anxiety, et cetera, and doing the thing that you want to do is because you're too busy focusing on yourself and how you appear to others and not busy focusing on the actual value you're providing. And then the one person took it a step further and they were like, if there's someone in the fire and you're going out to save them, you're not going to worry about how your hair looks, how your makeup looks, if your sound all right. It's like, man, that person's in the fire burning right now. If you stay, go and you have a chance to save them. Are you going to be sitting there worrying about how your makeup looks or if your shoes look nice or if you have, it's like, no, you're going to go out of your way and you're going to run and you're going to save them because you don't have time to think because it's not about how you appear. It's about providing that value. In that case, it's someone's life at stake. And most of us aren't dealing with life or death situations, but it's the same exact concept when you're pressing record versus, actually saving someone.
Yeah, I saw a study recently where they took a group of participants, split them into 2 different groups. Group 1, they were all making pottery bowls. Group 1 was instructed to make the best bowl that they could. Have you heard this story?
Yeah, I love it.
And then the second group was instructed to just make as many as they could. Well, the the result of it was that group one did a better bowl than the group two's first bowl. But when you looked at the last bowls that group two were producing, group two was making better bowls. The lesson there is action is better than spending a ton of time just solving one thing.
Yeah. And then all the time you spent preparation, you could have been actually doing it. And again, with Alice Ramos, he talked about he didn't take a sales course until I think he said he was making like $100,000 a year or something like that, or $100,000 a month. I forget which one it was. But he didn't start taking sales courses until long after he started making tons of money. And I mean, I'm not here to say whether that's the best way or not, but he makes more money than everyone I know combined. So I think it's some very credible advice. And pretty much what he's saying is, man, stop focusing on trying to figure out all the steps. You go out there and do it, because your 1,000th, sales call will teach you more about sales than any sales book could, because you're just learning from adapting and growing. So now you're in this point of your life. You just got over this giant obstacle, this giant hurdle that the city was trying to stop you from, you going through with this deal, what you're building. Now, from there, when did it really start kicking off for you? What was it like? So you got this, there's a quote I love, and it's usually the most important day to see whether or not you make it is the day right after success. Because most people take too long to get back on the horse because they're celebrating. So it's like, what was it like? You just overcame this giant milestone. You got the deal finally through, the building, the city finally approved. What was it like from there in your business and in your journey?
Boy, we just kept going. We kept building more buildings. We were growing during that time, maybe like 10 to 15% per year. But I think another major milestone for us is that got to one of our buildings and went on site, and just things were a mess. It just wasn't functioning right. We were growing, but things weren't clicking. And around this time, I was reading Reed Hastings' book, No Rules of Rules. Fantastic book, by the way. And in there, he talks about the importance of hiring the best. And I had some other life lessons during this time as well. But the most important lesson I've ever learned is that very point, is to hire the very best people. And even if maybe it's just you and one other person, partner, what have you, or maybe it's someone you're just partnering with, you're not hiring them, but focus on finding the very best people. And oftentimes people look at that and say, well, the best people, they're expensive. How in the world can I afford them? Or, how can I get them involved? What most people don't realize, and I certainly didn't realize it 10 years ago, is that the best people outperform the average by 2 to 5 to 10 times as much. And I have seen it literally again and again and again. I saw it again this week with another hire that we recently had. And when you look at what those people produce, they produce so much more than the average that they're actually less expensive to hire on. And so we have focused on bringing in just amazing people. And what that did is they started unlocking doors. Things became possible that I didn't think were possible. And we started doubling in size every year. So that's a huge lesson of my life and can make a major impact as you guys think about expanding your own businesses and professional careers.
Yeah. So let me ask you, right? So for someone that's around my age that, is just now getting into entrepreneurship, how does that apply to them? How does that make sense? Because a lot of times as a solopreneur, as someone brand new to entrepreneurship, we, for whatever reason, assume that we have to do everything, because if we're not doing it, then it won't get done right. It won't get done the way we want it to. And that we have to wear all our own hats, and we end up becoming our own bottlenecks. So like for someone that's newer to entrepreneurship, how does this apply to them?
Yeah. So a couple of different ways. One is think about your mentors. I'm sure you've heard it said, but if you look at the people around you that are closest to you, that is the biggest determinant to your long-term success. So make sure to be networking and connecting with people at levels beyond you. And that's terrifying. I've walked into many rooms where I just start shaking people's hands and they look at me a little bit funny and say, well, what are you doing here? Why are you bothering me? But I do that because I'm always pushing myself. Even in college, I was meeting with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and I would just email them up, or I would try to meet them at an event or connect. At one point, I went to a president and literally just walked into their office. It's like this gold-plated room, and the secretary stopped me, but at least I was able to give a card to the secretary, and then that president reached back out to me afterward. So think a lot about the people around in your life. Even for me, I literally work to find the world experts at things. We'll fly people in from other states. I'll find the world expert in a niche. I'll plead with them to come teach us for a couple of days. But there's a huge difference between the world expert at something versus the average person at that. I've seen it so many times. And then the second little thing is the solarpreneur stage, assuming things are going decently well, shouldn't last forever. And one of the hardest transitions to go through is from just yourself to your first employee, right? And the key there, the thing that will make your life easier from day one, is find someone really good. And it's going to be tough. It's a kind of a tough situation. You'll probably find someone mediocre. You have to hire a new person, go through that whole painful process. I've been through it many times. But really don't settle. Find someone good for that first position.
Yeah, definitely. And this is exciting because actually the month away from the time we're recording this, I'm actually going to be onboarding most likely my first intern. So it's a big first milestone. It's something I'm really looking forward to. And it's something that I never foresaw. It was an opportunity that kind of stumbled across me because it's a paid and experience internship. And so when I heard paid and experience, I had to jump the gun and, jump on the opportunity. And now I'm currently in the process of making sure I got my stuff in place and trying to get some SOPs down and writing some stuff down so that the onboarding process could be a lot easier. I know it's definitely going to be a mess, but it's one of those things where, as we mentioned earlier, and we kind of been talking about it already, is you got to figure it out sometime. You got to get in there and you just got to mess up a little bit and you will figure it out. And it's going to be a 7-week big learning process, but rather to learn with that experience than to learn when you actually have money on the line.
Yeah. And what's another interesting thing that probably people don't realize off of the bat is you can actually start hiring people relatively inexpensively and finding fantastic people. Great example is hiring people out of the Philippines right now. You can get a really great person for like $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year, and they're top notch, right? So that's kind of an interesting way. If you need the help, if you want to start expanding your time without spending a ton of money in that sphere, great opportunity for that.
100%. And I also love your story, man. You said focus on finding the world experts, and even in college, you were connected with like CEOs, and I was doing the same thing. So for me, when I was in college, there was something called alumni in residence that we had at UConn, and they would pretty much bring in alumni, and people who signed up would have an opportunity to have a 30-minute one-on-one with them. And I would always sign up whenever the opportunity presented itself. I would always sign up, and I was able to meet tons of amazing people. Now, where I fell through is I never nurtured these relationships post meeting them. So that was my fault. And I kind of let those relationships slip through the crack. But I was also super go-getter, and I was at least taking the first step to get in the door with some of these people. And it definitely helped me out a lot, because one of the questions I always asked was, what's something that you didn't learn in college that you learned during the workforce, or something along those lines? And the repeated story was that college is pretty much just to pretty much weed out the weak. And you actually learn all the stuff you need to learn when you're on the actual training grounds, when you're at the actual job, when you're actually starting your own business. And so for me, when the pandemic happened, the decision to drop out of college became super easy for me, because I had all this confirmation already that's like, hey, you just need this to get to one of these positions. And when I was like, well, corporate, I don't want to do that, and I have this opportunity to start entrepreneurship while the whole entire world's on pause, let me just go figure this out and start connecting with more people like I've always done, like getting my real estate license. Around the time I was halfway through my real estate course to get my license, I looked up top real estate agents in Stanford and literally cold emailed each and every one, and I got on a phone call with each and every one. So it's very similar to you. I was also reaching out to people that I probably had no business reaching out to, and going to networking events with people I had no business talking to or being in a room with, but just showing up anyways, despite my lack of experience, despite my inadequacies, as we talked about earlier, and it stepped into the room with a lot of these people or stepped on the phone with a lot of these people. And it's definitely been able to help me not only one, build solid connections, but two, build my online presence as well. Because you get seen with all these people, then people automatically assume you're on that circle, you're on that level as well, even if you may not be. Because
that's something I think you did really well, because we were at a networking event, at a conference where we met, and you were so good at networking. I'm sure you weren't originally, but getting out there and just being brave and building that kind of skill set, even if you don't connect with the right people, are building that with inside of yourself. And that is such a powerful asset for you in your own life and can help guide you quite a bit.
Yeah, thank you. And it's one of those things where a lot of young people don't realize that being young is almost an intrinsic business card that no one can take away from you, because a lot of the times people don't get into this game until later on. So no matter what the industry is, especially just so happens to like real estate, like that's a very old industry, generally speaking. Like the average age of realtor is like 54. And investors, I'm pretty sure it's even higher, because most people that don't invest until later in their life, because that's usually when people have more income to invest in, to dispose of. And so it's like, for me, just being the youngest person in the room in a lot of the rooms helps me to stand out. And on top of that, my curly hair also helps out as well. And the fact that I just so happen to be pretty extroverted. So there's a lot of other factors that come into play, but being young definitely is one of the ones that helps me out a ton. So let me ask you, right? So now you're going through this journey, right? You're now getting it going. You start hiring some of the amazing people, right? You start growing. Now, let me ask you, in terms of the housing crisis, right? Most young people don't really know why, this would matter in their lives, why this would affect them. But just break it down for us in as simply as you can, because I know it can get very complex very quickly. But like, where are we currently at this point in time that we're recording? We're now in April right now. So like, where are we currently at? And what are some of the changes that you are looking to make so that we don't have, this like apocalyptic future where housing prices are just insanely insane and, no one can afford anything and we become a full-on renter nation?
Yeah. So to give a little bit of history of the market, over the past 50 or 60 years, housing prices have risen faster than incomes. And 50 or 60 years ago, people could afford relatively easily. Homes and rents were pretty inexpensive relative to your income. It wasn't a major issue. But kind of like college prices, that used to be fairly inexpensive too. Those have risen a lot. And a lot of your listeners have probably felt some of that pain. The same is true with the housing market. So right now, on average, people are spending about 30-40% of their budget on housing. And so if we can solve that and bring that down by half, that gives you a huge chunk of income back to you in your life to go spend it on your solopreneurship or something else that is better to you in your life. Some of the ways that we're looking at solving it, a really simple concept is this. If you look at other industries like manufacturing and agriculture, they've improved substantially in the last 60 years. Manufacturing has improved by 760%, agriculture by 1,500%. During that same time period, construction has done almost nothing. It's been flat at 10%. And so we're just applying technologies and techniques that we've seen major innovations in those other spaces into construction. Construction is a world where the best minds don't often think, I want to go into construction. Rather than thinking really into tech or finance or something fun like that, or podcasting. And so we're just taking young blood and inspired people and driven people and bringing them into this industry and reinventing it, just doing things totally different. That's helping us solve some of these costs.
Yeah, no, I love that strategy, because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, and we talked offline before we hit record about the course that I have going on, and a lot of this information that I've been putting together is stuff that I've acquired and picked up through a lot of my workshops and podcasting and a lot of my stuff in like social media. Like when I first started teaching my first social media classes, it was a lot of the stuff was from people I followed on YouTube and other social media influencers. It wasn't from other real estate agents. And it's one of those things where I never understood, and this is me speaking to the real estate industry in general, but one of the main reasons why people hire real estate agents is to market their property. And most real estate agents don't know anything about marketing. So it really baffles me when I think about it, because it's like, man, what do you have going on here? But like, that's neither here nor there. But in terms of like getting stuff from other industries and putting it together, it gives you an insanely unique perspective. And you almost become similar to New York City, a giant melting pot of all these different ideas. And then if you could find a way to make it apply to whatever industry you're in, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to find which wheel from the other dealerships can come into your dealership, whatever it may be. So in this case, it's construction. For me, it was marketing for realtors. So it's like you took all these different things that we picked up from all these different dealerships and just brought it to the one that we were already in. And then it seems like we're marketing geniuses or, real estate gods. But in reality, it's just stuff we picked up and acquired along the way and had the creativity to learn how to apply it and tweak it to make it make sense in what we were doing.
Exactly. Most innovation isn't a totally new idea. Most innovation is taking some concept or an idea that's in some different space and applying it to yours, right? And if you can do that well, you can radically change things.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Mike. I'm wanting to ask you this for a little while now because it's something that I think a lot of listeners may be curious about. I had a lot of people personally reach out to me and thinking about getting into real estate. Now, I know you're not in your traditional real estate agent side of things, but how would someone get into what you have going on now? Like, how would if someone wanted to help in the construction side of things and help kind of solve this housing crisis, but is, you're super young and doesn't have much experience, how does one start easing their way into this industry and what you got going on?
Yeah, it depends on what level of involvement you want. And so one thing just with our company is we're launching a new investment platform. And most most people cannot invest in real estate. And the reason that is because you have to be an accredited investor. I think it's crazy. You have to have $200,000 or more in income, or you have to have $1 million in assets excluding your home. Well, guess what? That's not most people, right? So most people are excluded. One of the things that we did with our platform is we went down the harder, more expensive route to get special approval with the SEC so that anyone can invest in our platform at any dollar amount. And so if you want to get involved in a way to actually earn some rate of return, that's a great way to get started, just to get some exposure and helping out with what we're doing. But if you want to just get going on your own, that's a very reasonable possibility as well. And one simple way to do that is to earn enough money for a down deposit on a home and then rent it out, right? Even if it's just you and a few roommates. I have college friends that we did that. And you can get a couple of roommates there and they're paying for the entire house and then your rent is free. And so that's a great way to just get started and just to learn all the pain points. And a lot of people start there and then they get a second home, third home, a fourth home, then a duplex and a fourplex and an eightplex. And then you're on to 10s and 20s and 100 unit buildings. And then get to our scale and doing 500 units per building. So that's how to get started.
And that's amazing, man. You talked about a lot of amazing nuggets, man. I really love, you mentioned that necessity is the mother of innovation. That was a really good one. And the part where the, first, second, and third generation builds, second gen maintains, third gen destroys. That's the first time I heard that. And you mentioned tons of other amazing things. And Mike, where can we connect with you? Where can we find you at if we want to learn more about what you got going on and keep up with you?
Yeah, you can visit our website. It's norhart.com. That's NORHART.com. And on there, you can see the invest. The other interesting thing is we have a new podcast that we're working on called Becoming a Unicorn. By the time this is live, our podcast will probably be out there. But it's about the journey of small companies growing to billion-dollar scale. And what is that experience really like? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And so we got content related there and a couple other shows that we're working on that might be of interest to your audience. So take a look at our website.
That sounds amazing. That title is super amazing. I'm not sure if you sent that to me. Make sure you do so I can put that in the show notes for anyone that wants to check it out. And Mike, so now it's time for our rapid fire round, the famous 5 questions. Question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Hire the very best. It changed my world.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Integrity. In the sense of what I say I'm about, what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to follow through with what I'm saying, right? So your words and your actions line up.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
No Rules by Reed Hastings.
What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I want to solve America's housing affordability crisis.
And for anyone that wanted to start their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend?
If I was just starting out, the first step is lower your home expenses enough, give you some cushion to start investing a piece of your income regularly. You can do that. That's really the start of transforming your wealth situation.
Amazing, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on. I know it's been quite some time between when we met originally and when we got together, but I'm glad that we did. We definitely dropped a lot of impactful stuff that I didn't hear and I never heard before. So I definitely learned something from this conversation. So I know that my audience definitely will. So thanks again, Mike.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.